The rain fell steadily on the small Virginia town of Bridgewater as Sarah Mitchell walked into the local VFW hall. She moved with a quiet confidence that came from years of discipline, her posture straight despite the weight she carried, not on her shoulders, but in her heart. At 42, she had returned to civilian life just 6 months ago, and the transition felt harder than any mission she had ever completed. The VFW hall smelled of coffee and old wood. A group of men sat around a table near the back, their conversation loud and animated. Sarah recognized most of them. They were veterans like her, men who had served their country in different wars, different times. She had come here seeking fellowship, understanding, maybe even friendship. After 20 years of service, she thought this would be her tribe. "Can I help you, miss?" An older man approached her, his tone polite but dismissive. He wore a cap with his unit insignia, his eyes kind but uncertain. "I'm a veteran," Sarah said simply. "I heard this was a good place to meet other vets in town." The man's eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh, what did you do? Nursing, administration." Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest. She had heard these assumptions before. "I was a Navy SEAL," she said quietly. The conversation at the back table stopped. One of the men, a large fellow with a gray beard and a belly that hung over his belt, stood up. His name was Frank Morrison, and Sarah would soon learn he considered himself the unofficial leader of this group. Frank walked over, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. He looked Sarah up and down, a smirk playing at his lips. "You were a SEAL," he said the words slowly, as if testing them. Then he laughed, a deep, booming laugh that filled the hall. "Women can't be SEALs, sweetheart. Nice try, though." The other men shifted uncomfortably. A few chuckled nervously. One looked away. "I served for 20 years, Sarah said, her voice steady. "I earned my trident." Frank's smile widened. "Look, I don't know what you did in the Navy, and I'm sure it was important. Administrative work, logistics, that stuff keeps the military running. But SEAL, that's not for women, it's just biology. No offense, but you're not built for it." Sarah's hands clenched at her sides. She could have told him about Hell Week. She could have described the cold that seeped into your bones during surf torture, the sand that got into every part of your body during log drills, the exhaustion that made you question everything. She could have told him about the missions, the desert compounds, the mountain hideouts, the night raids where one mistake meant death. But she had learned long ago that some people didn't want to hear the truth. They wanted their version of the world to remain unchanged. "I have my DD-214, Sarah said, referring to her military discharge papers. "I can show you my service record." Frank waved his hand dismissively. "I'm sure you served. I'm just saying you weren't a SEAL. Maybe you worked with SEALs. Maybe you were support staff. But the actual SEAL teams, that's a brotherhood, sweetheart, not a sisterhood." The word sweetheart grated on Sarah's nerves. She had been called many things in her career: warrior, operator, teammate, never sweetheart, not in that tone. "I see," Sarah said quietly. She turned toward the door. "Hey, don't leave mad," Frank called after her. "We just like to keep things honest here. Stolen valor is a real problem, you know. People pretending to be things they're not." Sarah stopped. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Stolen valor. He was accusing her of lying about her service, of dishonoring those who truly served. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't turn around. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she said, her voice low. "Then prove it," Frank challenged. "Bring your papers, show us your SEAL trident. Hell, tell us about your missions. Real SEALs love to talk about their deployments." Sarah knew this trap. Real operators rarely talked about their missions, especially not to strangers trying to catch them in a lie. The missions were classified. The details were sealed. Even the successes remained in shadows. "I don't need to prove anything to you," Sarah said. She walked out into the rain. Behind her, she heard Frank's voice. "That's what I thought. All talk, no proof." The men laughed. The door closed. Sarah stood in the parking lot, rain soaking through her jacket, and felt more alone than she had in any combat zone. Sarah drove home through the quiet streets of Bridgewater. The town was small, just 15,000 people, mostly families and retirees. She had chosen it specifically for its quiet. After 2 decades of chaos, noise, and violence, she craved peace. Her house was a small ranch-style home on Oak Street. It needed work, the paint was peeling, the yard was overgrown, but it was hers. She had paid cash for it with her savings. No mortgage, no debt, freedom. Inside, she made tea and sat at her kitchen table. The house was sparsely furnished. She hadn't accumulated many possessions over the years. Most of her adult life had been spent in barracks, on bases, or in the field. Personal items were a liability when you moved every few years. On the table sat a wooden box. Sarah opened it carefully. Inside was her trident, the special warfare insignia that marked her as a Navy SEAL. The gold eagle, anchor, and pistol gleamed even in the dim kitchen light. Next to it was her service record, her citations, and a photo from her graduation from Bud S training. She looked younger in the photo, her face leaner, her eyes harder. She also kept a small notebook in the box. It was worn, the pages yellowed. Inside were names and dates, not of her teammates, but of targets. 317 names, to be exact. Each one represented a confirmed kill, a mission completed, a threat eliminated. Sarah rarely looked at the notebook. It represented a part of her life she was trying to leave behind. But tonight, with Frank's laughter still echoing in her ears, she needed the reminder. She needed to know that her service was real, that her sacrifices mattered. The first name in the book was from Afghanistan, 2005. A Taliban commander who had orchestrated attacks on civilian villages. Sarah had tracked him for 3 weeks through the mountains, finally taking the shot from over 1,000 yards away. The mission had saved hundreds of lives. The names continued, page after page. Some missions in Afghanistan, others in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and places that remained classified even now. Each name was a story. Each story was a life saved, often many lives. She closed the notebook and put it back in the box. The phone rang. Sarah glanced at the caller ID. It was her former commanding officer, Captain James Rivera. She hadn't heard from him in months. "Rivera," she answered. "Mitchell, how are you adjusting?" His voice was warm, concerned. "I'm fine, sir." "You don't have to call me sir anymore, Sarah. We're both civilians now." Sarah smiled slightly. Hard habit to break. "I heard you tried the VFW hall today." Rivera paused. "Small town, word travels fast." Sarah's smile faded. "How did you?" "One of the guys there, Tom Henderson, called me. He served with my dad in Vietnam. He said Frank Morrison gave you a hard time." "It's fine. I can handle it." "I know you can, but you shouldn't have to. Look, Frank is old school. He doesn't understand that things have changed. Women have been serving in combat roles for years now. The SEAL teams opened up to women in 2016. You were already serving before that, part of the programs that paved the way." "He called it stolen valor," Sarah said quietly. Rivera swore under his breath. "That's out of line, way out of line. You want me to talk to him?" "No, I don't need you fighting my battles." "This isn't about fighting battles, Sarah. It's about respect. You earned that trident. You bled for it. You've done things most people can't even imagine. Frank Morrison doesn't get to take that away from you with his ignorance." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I thought coming to a small town would be peaceful. I thought I could just blend in, be normal." "You are normal. You're also exceptional. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive." Rivera sighed. "Give it time. People will come around once they get to know you." "Maybe." They talked for a few more minutes before saying goodbye. After hanging up, Sarah sat in the silence of her kitchen. The rain had stopped. Through the window, she could see her neighbors' houses, lights glowing warm in the darkness. She wondered if she had made a mistake coming here. Maybe she should have chosen a bigger city, a place where she could disappear completely. But she was tired of hiding, tired of pretending to be less than she was. Tomorrow, she decided, she would try again. She would go about her life in Bridgewater, hold her head high, and let her actions speak louder than Frank Morrison's laughter. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel the hurt, to acknowledge that his words had cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She had faced enemy fire without flinching, but the dismissal of her own countrymen wounded her in ways combat never had. Sarah made herself dinner, a simple meal of chicken and vegetables. She ate slowly, mindfully, another habit from her training. She watched the news, did her evening workout routine, and prepared for bed. As she lay in the darkness, she thought about her teammates. Some had died in combat. Others had transitioned successfully to civilian life. A few struggled, like her, to find their place in a world that didn't quite understand what they had given. She thought about the missions, the lives saved, the threats eliminated. She thought about the price she had paid, the relationships that failed, the family events she missed, the pieces of herself she left in foreign deserts and mountains. And she thought about Frank Morrison's laughter. Sleep came slowly, as it often did. But when it came, Sarah Mitchell slept the sleep of a warrior, light, alert, ready, because some habits never died, some training never faded. And some truths, no matter how loudly denied, remained unshakable. She was a Navy SEAL. She had served with honor, and no one's disbelief could change that. Part 2. Building a Life. The weeks following Sarah's encounter at the VFW hall passed slowly. She established a routine, which helped. Every morning, she woke at 5, went for a run through the quiet streets of Bridgewater, then returned home for coffee and breakfast. The discipline of routine was something she had relied on for 20 years, and it served her well now. She took a job at the local hardware store, Miller's Hardware, run by an elderly man named George Miller. George was in his 70s, his hands gnarled by arthritis, and he needed help lifting heavy items and managing inventory. The work was simple, honest, and exactly what Sarah needed. George didn't ask many questions. On her first day, he had simply looked at her and said, "You military?" "Navy," Sarah had replied. "Good enough for me. My son served in the Marines. Killed in Fallujah, 2004. "I'm sorry." George had nodded, his eyes distant for a moment. "You got the look, the way you stand, the way you move. I can tell. Whatever you did over there, thank you for your service." It was the first genuine thank you she had received in Bridgewater, and it meant more than George probably knew. The hardware store became Sarah's sanctuary. She learned the inventory, helped customers find what they needed, and occasionally gave advice on home repairs. She discovered she liked helping people with their everyday problems: a leaky faucet, a squeaky door, a fence that needed mending. These were problems with clear solutions. Unlike war, unlike combat, unlike the moral complexities of her former life, these problems could be fixed. Customers started to recognize her. Mrs. Patterson, a widow in her 80s, came in regularly and always asked for Sarah's help. "You're strong," she would say with admiration, "and patient. So many young people today don't have patience." Young people. Sarah was 42, but to Mrs. Patterson, she supposed she was young. Tom Henderson, the veteran who had called Captain Rivera, started coming by the store too. He was a quiet man in his 70s, his face weathered, his hands steady. He never mentioned the incident at the VFW, but he was always kind to Sarah. One afternoon, as she helped him load bags of concrete mix into his truck, he said, "My daughter's about your age. She's a teacher in Richmond. Strong woman like you. Raised 2 kids on her own after her husband left." "That takes real strength," Sarah said. Tom nodded. "Different kind of strength than what you showed in the service, I imagine, but strength nonetheless." He paused. "For what it's worth, I believe you, about being a SEAL." Sarah met his eyes. "Thank you." "Frank Morrison's a blowhard, always has been. He served, and I respect that, but he thinks his experience is the only experience. The world changed. He didn't change with it." Tom climbed into his truck. "Give him time, or don't. You don't owe him anything." As Tom drove away, Sarah felt a small measure of validation. It wasn't much, but it was something. Despite Tom's kindness and George's acceptance, Sarah still felt the weight of Frank Morrison's accusation. It followed her through town like a shadow. She noticed the sideways glances from some of the other veterans. She heard the whispers that stopped when she approached. The VFW hall had always been a place where veterans gathered, but Frank had turned it into hostile territory for her. She refused to let that stand. After a month of keeping her distance, she decided to return. It was a Tuesday evening when she walked back through those doors. The same group of men sat at the same table. Frank was holding court, telling a story about his time in the army. When he saw Sarah, his story stopped mid-sentence. "Well, well," he said loudly. "Look who's back, come to tell us more tall tales." Sarah walked directly to their table. She carried a folder under her arm. "I came to show you my service record," she said calmly, "since you accused me of stolen valor." Frank leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "I'm listening." Sarah opened the folder and pulled out her DD-214. She placed it on the table in front of Frank. "My discharge papers. Honorable discharge after 20 years of service." Frank picked up the document, scanning it. His expression didn't change. "This says you were in Naval Special Warfare. That's not the same as being a SEAL." "Naval Special Warfare is the SEAL teams," Sarah said patiently. "That's what it's called officially." "Could be a support role," Frank countered. "Intelligence analyst, logistics, communications, all those fall under special warfare." Sarah pulled out another document. "My citation for the Navy Cross, second highest military decoration for valor in combat." Frank's eyes widened slightly as he read. The room had gone quiet. Even his closest friends leaned forward to see. The citation was heavily redacted. Black bars covered most of the details, but the essence was clear. Sarah Mitchell had engaged enemy forces under heavy fire, sustained injuries, and continued fighting to protect her team. She had eliminated multiple targets and ensured the successful extraction of high-value intelligence. "Could be fake," Frank muttered, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Call the Navy," Sarah said. "Verify it yourself. My service number is right there." One of the other men, a former Marine named Bill Kowalski, spoke up. "Frank, I think maybe you owe her an apology." Frank's face flushed red. "For what? For being skeptical, for asking questions? In my day, you didn't have women pretending to be special operators." "I'm not pretending," Sarah said quietly. "I am a special operator. I served in combat zones for 15 years. I led missions. I trained other operators. I've done things I can never talk about, in places I can never name, against enemies you've never heard of." "Then why didn't you say this before?" Frank demanded. "Why didn't you prove it right away?" "Because I shouldn't have to," Sarah said. "When you walked in here and told everyone you served, did anyone ask you to prove it? Did anyone demand to see your papers? Or did they take you at your word, because that's what you do for a fellow veteran?" The room was silent. Several men looked uncomfortable. Tom Henderson, sitting near the back, nodded slowly. Frank stared at the documents, his jaw working. Finally, he pushed them back across the table. "Fine, you served. I'll give you that. But you still can't be a SEAL. Women weren't allowed in the SEAL teams until 2016. This DD-214 says you started in 2002. "Women weren't allowed in the SEAL teams officially until 2016, Sarah corrected. "But there were programs before that, task forces, special access programs. Women served in roles that weren't officially acknowledged. We went through the same training, the same missions, the same dangers. We just didn't get the same recognition." She pulled out one more item from her folder, a photograph. It showed a younger Sarah in full combat gear, standing with a team of operators in a desert environment. Their faces were blurred for security, but the SEAL trident was visible on several uniforms. "This was taken in Afghanistan, 2008, Sarah said. "I can't tell you where or why, but I can tell you that I was there. I earned my place on that team, and I don't need your approval or your belief to know that what I did mattered." Frank stared at the photograph for a long moment. The swagger had drained from his posture. He looked older suddenly, tired. He started, then stopped. "I didn't know." "No," Sarah agreed. "You didn't. But you assumed, and you laughed, and you accused me of stolen valor in front of everyone." Frank was quiet. Bill Kowalski stood up and extended his hand to Sarah. "On behalf of this post, I apologize. What Frank said was wrong. You're welcome here anytime." Sarah shook his hand. Others stood as well, offering their own apologies, their own welcomes. Not all of them. A few men left without speaking, loyal to Frank or perhaps simply unable to adjust their worldview. But it was enough. Frank remained seated, staring at the table. As Sarah gathered her documents to leave, he spoke. "How many?" Sarah turned. "How many what?" "Missions, deployments. How many times did you put your life on the line?" Sarah considered not answering. But something in Frank's voice, genuine curiosity, maybe even remorse, made her pause. "Deployments, 13. Missions, I stopped counting after 500. She hesitated, then added, "Confirmed kills, 317. The number hung in the air like thunder. Several men gasped. Bill Kowalski's eyes went wide. Tom Henderson simply nodded, as if he had suspected something like that all along. Frank looked up at her, and for the first time there was no mockery in his expression. Only shock, and perhaps, finally, respect. 300. He couldn't finish the sentence. "I was a sniper," Sarah said simply. "Among other things, I did what my country asked me to do. I protected my teammates. I eliminated threats. I came home." She walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. "In case you're wondering, Frank, the number isn't something I'm proud of. Each one of those names is burned into my memory. Each one represents a life taken, even if it was necessary. I carry them with me every day, so don't ever accuse me of stolen valor again. I earned every scar, every medal, every nightmare." She left before anyone could respond. The drive home was quiet. Sarah's hands were steady on the wheel, but her heart raced. Revealing that number, 317, was something she rarely did. Captain Rivera knew, of course. Her teammates knew, but civilians couldn't comprehend it. 317 human beings, eliminated by her hand. Most at long range through a scope, some up close. All of them enemy combatants, all of them threats. But still. At home, she sat in her kitchen and made tea. Her phone buzzed. A text from Captain Rivera. "Heard you went back to the VFW. You okay?" Sarah typed back. "I'm fine. Showed them my record. They believe me now." "Good. Proud of you." Another text came through, this one from an unknown number. "This is Bill Kowalski from the VFW. Got your number from Tom Henderson. Hope that's okay. Just wanted to say again how sorry we are. You're a true warrior and a hero. You're always welcome at our post." Sarah replied, "Thank you, I appreciate it." She set the phone down and sipped her tea. The validation felt good, but it also felt hollow somehow. She hadn't returned to the VFW seeking praise or recognition. She had simply wanted to be treated as an equal, as a fellow veteran. Now they knew the truth, or part of it, but Sarah wondered if they really understood. Could anyone who hadn't lived that life truly comprehend it? She thought about her 317, each face, each circumstance. The Taliban commander in the mountains, the insurgent sniper in Baghdad, the terrorist cell leader in Yemen, on and on. She had saved lives, she knew that. For every target eliminated, countless innocents were protected. That was the calculus of war, the impossible mathematics of combat. But it didn't make the weight any lighter. Sarah finished her tea and prepared for bed. Tomorrow she would return to work at the hardware store. She would help Mrs. Patterson find the right size screws. She would advise young couples on paint colors. She would lift heavy bags and restock shelves. It was a quiet life, an ordinary life, and after everything, that was exactly what she needed. But as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't help wondering, would the truth she had revealed tonight change how people saw her? Would they look at her with respect or with fear? Only time would tell. Part 3. The Incident. 3 months after Sarah's revelation at the VFW Hall, life in Bridgewater had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The veterans treated her with respect now. Some kept their distance. The number she had revealed seemed to unsettle them, but others sought her out. Tom Henderson invited her to coffee regularly. Bill Kowalski asked her to speak at a local high school about military service. Even Frank Morrison had changed. He didn't apologize directly, but he nodded to her when they passed on the street. Once, he even held the door open for her at the post office. It wasn't friendship, but it was progress. Sarah found herself slowly becoming part of the community. She helped Mrs. Patterson repair her porch railing. She volunteered at the local food bank on Saturdays. She attended town council meetings. Small things, but meaningful. Then came the incident that would change everything. It was a Thursday afternoon in late September. The leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the town in shades of gold and crimson. Sarah was closing up the hardware store. George had left early for a doctor's appointment when she heard the commotion outside. Shouting, a woman's scream, the screech of tires. Sarah's training kicked in instantly. She moved to the window and assessed the situation. Across the street, outside the First National Bank, 3 men were running toward a black SUV. One of them carried a duffel bag. Another dragged a woman by her arm, a bank teller. Sarah recognized her as Linda Chen, a young woman who always smiled when she came into the hardware store. A bank robbery, in progress. Sarah's mind raced through options. Call 911, already being done. She could see people on their phones. Wait for police. The station was 10 minutes away. The robbers would be gone by then. The third man held a gun. He fired a shot into the air, sending pedestrians scattering. Sarah made her decision in a heartbeat. She locked the store's front door and moved to the back room where George kept his hunting rifle. It was a Remington 700, well-maintained, with a decent scope. She had seen it when she started working there, had checked it out of professional habit. George had told her it was loaded, in case of emergencies. This qualified. Sarah grabbed the rifle and moved to the store's second-floor window. George used the upstairs for storage, and it provided a clear view of the street. She opened the window quietly, assessed the distance, approximately 75 yards, and the wind, minimal, left to right. The robbers were pushing Linda Chen toward the SUV. She was crying, fighting. One of the men hit her in the face with his pistol. She fell to the ground. Sarah's breath steadied. Her heartbeat slowed. Time seemed to dilate, a phenomenon she had experienced hundreds of times before. Everything became crystal clear, the angle, the distance, the variables. The man with the gun stood over Linda, his weapon pointed down at her. "Get in the car," he screamed. Sarah exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle shot echoed through the street. The gunman dropped instantly, his weapon clattering to the pavement. The other 2 robbers froze in shock. Sarah cycled the bolt smoothly, chambering another round. The second robber, the one holding the duffel bag, reached for a weapon in his waistband. Sarah fired again. He collapsed next to his partner. The third robber dropped the car keys and raised his hands. "Don't shoot, don't shoot." "Lie down on the ground," Sarah commanded, her voice carrying across the street with the authority of someone who expected to be obeyed. "Face down, hands behind your head." The man complied immediately. Sarah kept the rifle trained on him while scanning for additional threats. The street was chaos, people screaming, running, hiding, but the immediate danger was neutralized. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Linda Chen crawled away from the fallen robbers, her face bloodied but alive. Sarah watched as several brave citizens rushed to help her to safety. The police arrived 4 minutes later, faster than expected. Chief Marcus Webb led the response, his officers securing the scene with professional efficiency. An ambulance followed shortly after. Sarah cleared the rifle, made it safe, and waited upstairs. She knew what came next. She had been through this procedure before, though never on American soil, never in a small town in Virginia. 2 officers entered the hardware store, weapons drawn. "Police, show yourself." "Second floor," Sarah called down. "I'm the shooter, I'm unarmed, coming down now." She descended the stairs slowly, hands visible. The officers were young, nervous. She recognized one of them, Officer Davis, who had bought paint supplies last month for his daughter's bedroom. "Ms. Mitchell," Davis said, surprised, "you fired those shots." "Yes, the rifle is upstairs on the floor, cleared and safe. 2 armed robbers neutralized, 1 in custody. The bank employee is injured but mobile." Chief Webb entered the store, his face grim. He was in his 50s, a career lawman with salt and pepper hair and intelligent eyes. Sarah Mitchell. Yes, sir. I need you to come with us. We have questions. Of course. At the police station, Sarah was placed in an interview room. It wasn't an interrogation, not exactly, but it was clear they needed to understand what had happened. Chief Webb sat across from her, a recorder on the table between them. Walk me through it, he said. Sarah described the events clearly, precisely. She had witnessed the robbery, assessed the threat, acted to protect the victim. She had used the minimum force necessary to neutralize the danger. You're aware, Webb said carefully, that you killed 2 men today. Yes. How do you feel about that? Sarah met his eyes. I feel grateful that Linda Chen is alive. I feel relieved that no one else was hurt. I feel confident that my actions were justified. You don't feel remorse. Chief Webb, I spent 15 years in combat zones. I've taken hostile fire more times than I can count. I've made impossible decisions under unimaginable pressure. What I feel personally is complicated and private, but professionally, I did what needed to be done. Webb studied her for a long moment. Your former military. Navy, 20 years. Special Forces. Sarah hesitated. The chief was local law enforcement, not cleared for classified information. I served in naval special warfare. Understanding flickered in Webb's eyes. A SEAL. I can't discuss the details of my service. But you were trained for this, for precision shooting under stress. Yes. Webb leaned back. The media is going to have a field day with this. Local woman stops bank robbery with 2 perfect shots. They're already gathering outside. Sarah hadn't considered that. I didn't do it for recognition. I know, but that's what you're going to get. Webb turned off the recorder. Off the record, thank you. Linda Chen is Tom Henderson's niece. If you hadn't acted when you did, she'd likely be dead. So would several other people. Those men had hostage situations in 3 other states. They were escalating. How did they end up here? Sarah asked. Bridgewater's not exactly a major city. Small town bank, minimal security, easy escape routes to the interstate. They thought we'd be an easy target. Webb smiled grimly. They didn't count on you. The investigation took 3 days. During that time, Sarah stayed in her house, avoiding the reporters camped outside. The shooting was ruled justified, self-defense and defense of others. The district attorney declined to press charges. The 2 robbers Sarah had shot were identified as James Brennan and Curtis Vasquez, both with lengthy criminal records including armed robbery and assault. The 3rd robber, Michael Torres, was arrested and charged. Linda Chen recovered from her injuries. She asked to meet Sarah. They met at Sarah's house, away from the media circus. Linda was young, just 26, with dark hair and eyes that still showed fear. I wanted to thank you, Linda said quietly. He was going to kill me. I know he was. You're safe now, Sarah said. That's what matters. I keep replaying it in my mind, the gunshot, and then he just fell. I didn't even understand what happened at first. Linda wiped her eyes. The police told me you were military, special forces. Is that true? Yes. How many times have you done something like that? Sarah considered her answer carefully. More than I'd like to remember. Does it get easier? No, Sarah said honestly. It never gets easier, you just learn to live with it. Linda nodded slowly. My Uncle Tom said you're the bravest person he's ever met. Tom Henderson is your uncle. Yes, he talks about you all the time, says you're a real hero. Linda managed a small smile. I believe him now. After Linda left, Sarah sat alone in her house. The media attention was overwhelming, television crews, newspaper reporters, even a producer from a true crime podcast. Everyone wanted her story. But Sarah didn't want to tell her story. She had acted out of necessity, out of training, out of a fundamental inability to stand by while someone was in danger. She wasn't a hero. She was simply someone who had the skills and the will to act when others couldn't. The phone rang. Captain Rivera. You're all over the news, he said. Hell of a shot. Thanks. How are you holding up? Fine. It's strange, being in the spotlight like this. You saved lives, Sarah. People want to thank you for that. I know, it just feels complicated. Rivera was quiet for a moment. The number, 317, that's going to come up now. Reporters are going to dig into your background. Let them. My service record is classified. They won't find anything. They'll find enough. Someone will talk. Someone always talks. He was right, and Sarah knew it. The carefully constructed privacy she had built was about to crumble. Whatever happens, Rivera said, remember that you're not alone. Your teammates, your brothers and sisters in arms, we've got your back. I appreciate that. After hanging up, Sarah walked to her window and looked out at the street. The reporters were still there, cameras ready, microphones prepared. They wanted a story. They wanted a hero. What they would get, she thought, was the truth, or at least as much of it as she could give them. Because Frank Morrison's laughter, his accusation of stolen valor, had been just the beginning. Now the whole world was about to learn who Sarah Mitchell really was. And she had to decide how much of herself she was willing to reveal. Part 4, The Truth Emerges. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. Sarah was making coffee when her phone began buzzing with calls and messages. She ignored them at first, but when Tom Henderson called, she answered. Sarah, you need to see the news, he said, his voice tense. She turned on the television. Her face filled the screen, a photo from her Navy days, young and serious in her dress uniform. The banner beneath read, Bank robbery hero has 300+ confirmed kills. Sarah's stomach dropped. The news anchor spoke with barely contained excitement. Sarah Mitchell, the Bridgewater woman who stopped a violent bank robbery last week, is more than just a good shot. According to military sources, Mitchell served 20 years in naval special warfare and is credited with over 300 confirmed kills during her deployments. This makes her one of the deadliest snipers in American military history. They cut to an interview with an unnamed Pentagon official who confirmed that Mitchell had served in classified operations across multiple theaters. They showed blurred photos of mission briefings, redacted documents, and testimonies from other special operators who spoke of a legendary female sniper. Sarah turned off the television. Her hands were shaking, not from fear but from anger. Her service, her private burden, had been exposed without her consent. The phone rang again. This time it was a reporter from the Washington Post, then CNN, then Fox News. Sarah let them all go to voicemail. By noon, there were twice as many reporters outside her house. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalks, some supportive, others just curious. The quiet life Sarah had built was gone. George Miller called from the hardware store. Sarah, you take whatever time you need. Don't worry about work. But you should know, people are coming by asking about you, wanting to know if you're hearing for protection, if you're teaching shooting classes, all kinds of things. I'm not interested in any of that, Sarah said. I figured, just wanted you to know. The messages kept coming. Some were supportive, veterans praising her service, civilians thanking her for saving Linda Chen. But others were darker. Accusations that she was a killer, demands to know how many innocent people had died, conspiracy theories about black ops and assassinations. One message, anonymous and threatening, simply said, "Baby killer, you'll pay." Sarah reported it to Chief Webb, who promised to investigate, but she knew from experience that anonymous threats were difficult to trace and often harmless. Still, she took precautions. She checked her home security. She varied her routines. She watched for surveillance. Old habits from a dangerous life. The town of Bridgewater reacted in waves. At first, there was pride. Their quiet neighbor was a decorated war hero, a real-life action hero who had saved lives. Local businesses put up signs. "Welcome home, Sarah and Bridgewater supports our heroes." But as more details emerged, opinions began to shift. A video surfaced on social media, poorly edited, filled with dramatic music. showing Sarah's confirmed kill count alongside photos of Middle Eastern civilians. The implication was clear. Sarah Mitchell was a murderer. The video went viral. Suddenly, protesters appeared in Bridgewater. They set up outside Sarah's house with signs reading "War Criminal" and "No Killing in Our Name." They chanted. They gave interviews to sympathetic journalists. Sarah stayed inside, watching it all unfold from behind her curtains. Frank Morrison, of all people, was the first to defend her publicly. He appeared on the local news, his gruff face filling the screen. "I'll admit it, I didn't believe Sarah Mitchell at first when she told me she was a SEAL. I was wrong, dead wrong, and I apologized. But now I'm seeing people call her a war criminal. That's garbage. This woman served her country. She followed orders. She protected her teammates. She eliminated enemy combatants, terrorists who would have killed Americans and innocent civilians. You don't have to like war, but you damn well better respect the warriors who fight them." Tom Henderson joined him, along with Bill Kowalski and several other veterans. They formed a counter-protest, standing between Sarah's house and the demonstrators. "You want to protest war? Fine," Tom told a journalist. "But you don't attack a soldier for doing her duty. You don't spit on someone who sacrificed everything to keep you safe." The town split down the middle. Some sided with the veterans, seeing Sarah as a hero unfairly vilified. Others sided with the protesters, unable to reconcile the quiet woman they had known with the number that haunted her, 317. Sarah remained silent through it all. She didn't give interviews. She didn't release statements. She simply endured. On the 8th day of the media siege, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Chief Webb called ahead, asking if she would meet with someone. "He's former military," Webb said. "Says he served with you. Name's James Rivera." "Captain Rivera." Sarah felt a wave of relief. "Send him over." Rivera arrived in a rental car, dressed in civilian clothes but still carrying himself like an officer. When Sarah opened the door, he smiled warmly. "Hey, Mitchell." "Sir," Sarah said, stepping aside to let him in. Still with the "sir," some things never change. Rivera looked around her modest house. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better." They sat in the kitchen. Rivera declined coffee but accepted water. "This whole thing is out of control," he said. "The Pentagon is furious that your service details leaked. They're conducting an internal investigation to find the source." "It doesn't matter now. It's out there." "It does matter. What you did was classified for a reason. Not just for operational security, but for your protection. The people you eliminated, their organizations, their families, they don't forget." Sarah had considered this. "You think I'm in danger?" "I think you're more exposed than you've been in your entire career, and I think we need to get ahead of this before it gets worse." Rivera leaned forward. "I want you to tell your story, the real story, not the edited version, not the sensationalized version, your truth." "I don't owe anyone my story." "No, you don't. But right now, other people are telling it for you, and they're getting it wrong. Half these protesters think you were shooting civilians. The other half think you're some kind of psychopath. Neither is true, and you know it." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "If I tell my story, I have to tell all of it. The missions I can't talk about, the places I can't name, the things that still wake me up at night." "Tell what you can. The rest we'll handle through proper channels." "And if I don't want to?" Rivera smiled sadly. "Then you'll spend the rest of your life watching from behind closed curtains while people who never served, never fought, never sacrificed, judge you for doing what they never could." Sarah thought about Rivera's words for 2 days. She watched the protests continue. She read the articles, both supportive and critical. She saw herself reduced to a number, 317, as if that was all she was. Finally, she made her decision. She called Bill Kowalski at the VFW and asked if she could use their hall. "I want to hold a press conference," she said. "Tell my side of things." Bill didn't hesitate. "Absolutely, when?" "Tomorrow, 2 o'clock." The next day, the VFW hall was packed. Reporters filled every seat, cameras lined the back wall, and microphones covered the podium. The veterans of Post 142 stood along the sides, a silent honor guard for one of their own. Sarah walked to the podium in her best civilian clothes, simple slacks and a blouse. She had debated wearing her uniform but decided against it. She wasn't hiding behind her service. She was standing on it. She looked out at the crowd and felt surprisingly calm. This was just another mission. Different terrain, different rules, but still a mission. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she began. "I served in the United States Navy for 20 years. I was a member of Naval Special Warfare, and yes, I was a Navy SEAL." Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. "I'm here today because my service record has been made public without my consent. Numbers have been thrown around, 317 confirmed kills. That number is accurate. It's also incomplete." She paused, gathering her thoughts. Each of those 317 represents a mission, a target, an enemy combatant who posed a clear and present danger to American lives, to innocent civilians, or to international security. I didn't wake up each morning looking for people to kill. I woke up each morning asking how I could keep my teammates alive, how I could complete the mission, how I could make the world a little bit safer. Sarah's voice remained steady, but emotion crept in at the edges. "I've been called a war criminal this week. I've been called a murderer. I've been compared to the enemies I fought against. To those people I say this, I followed the laws of war. I operated under strict rules of engagement. Every shot I took was authorized, necessary, and legal. I targeted combatants, men who chose to take up arms against innocent people. Men who planned attacks, who funded terrorism, who trained suicide bombers." She let that sink in. "But I also want to acknowledge something that's been lost in all of this. Those 317 people, they were human beings. They had families, histories, beliefs. I don't celebrate their deaths. I don't take pride in that number. I carry it like a weight every single day. Because taking a life, even in war, even when necessary, costs something. It costs a piece of your soul." The room was absolutely silent. "I came to Bridgewater to escape that weight, to find peace, to build a quiet life. And for a while I did. I made friends. I found meaningful work. I became part of a community. Then I stopped a bank robbery, and suddenly my entire past was dragged into the light." Sarah's jaw tightened. "I don't regret stopping those robbers. Linda Chen is alive because I acted. But I do regret that my service has become a spectacle. That protesters stand outside my home judging me for wars they never fought. That reporters speculate about missions they'll never understand." She leaned forward, gripping the podium. "Here's what I want you to know. I'm not a hero. I'm not a villain. I'm a veteran who did her job, who served her country, and who came home carrying scars you can't see. I'm a woman who wants to live in peace but who will still act when innocent lives are in danger. That's who I am. That's who I'll always be." Sarah straightened. "If you want to protest war, protest war. I won't stop you. War is ugly and tragic and should always be a last resort. But if you're going to protest me, if you're going to judge me, then I ask that you first understand what you're talking about. Understand the context. Understand the sacrifice. Understand that freedom isn't free and someone has to pay the price." She paused one last time. "I've paid mine, in full, and I'm done apologizing for it." Sarah stepped away from the podium. The room erupted in questions, but she didn't stop. She walked through the crowd, through the cameras, out into the afternoon sun. Behind her, she heard Frank Morrison's voice. "That's enough," she said her piece. "Let her be." Tom Henderson and the other veterans formed a wall, protecting Sarah's exit. She drove home in silence, parked in her driveway, and walked into her house. The protesters were gone. Chief Webb had moved them back during the press conference for safety reasons. Sarah sat in her kitchen, emotionally drained but somehow lighter. She had told her truth. What happened next was beyond her control. The phone buzzed, a text from Captain Rivera. "Well done, Mitchell, proud of you." Another text from Linda Chen. "Thank you for everything, you're my hero." And finally, one from George Miller. "Come back to work whenever you're ready. Your job is waiting." Sarah smiled. Maybe, just maybe, she could still have her quiet life. But first, She had to see how the world responded to the truth she had just revealed. Part 5. Redemption and Peace. The days following Sarah's press conference brought unexpected change. The video went viral, accumulating millions of views within 48 hours. News networks played it on loop, dissecting every word, every pause, every emotion that flickered across her face. Public opinion began to shift. Veterans organizations rallied behind her. The American Legion issued a statement condemning the harassment of decorated service members. The Navy SEAL Foundation, while not commenting directly on her classified service, released a general statement about the sacrifice of special operations personnel. The protesters outside her house dwindled. Some left convinced by her words. Others simply moved on to the next controversy. Within a week, only a handful remained, and they were peaceful, simply holding signs supporting dialogue about military policy rather than attacking Sarah personally.